What's up, everyone? Welcome into the Dear Miss Fantasy Show with your host, me, Tera Roberts. This is the official mailbag show for Player Profiler. It is Wednesday, September 18th. We are live, so welcome in everyone that is tuning in. Say hi in the chat. We are live across multiple Player Profiler platforms. We are also live over on my TikTok over here. So if you got questions, drop them and be patient with me because we got some things to talk about. And then I'm going to dive into the questions. Of course, it's a mailbag show, so ask away. And we got the ones that were submitted in early as well. So welcome. Week two was my happy place. I had a good time in week two. I did not have a good time with the injuries. Not going to lie there. I'm pretty sure I have I actually should take a screenshot of a couple of the rosters. I have some benches that are have legitimately no healthy players. So that's not fun. But aside from that, it was my happy place because sometimes I like being correct more than I like having healthy fantasy players. My boy Drake London had a decent game. Finally, thank God. I was getting worried there for a second. I say finally, it was only the second game of the season, but things were looking a little shaky there for a second. They were looking shaky. Like let's not bury the lead on that one. But I was happy for him to finally have some resemblance of a decent game there. As you know, Jameson Williams Truther as well, and he was still fantastic in terms of having strong production, good targets, decent fantasy value, a low-end wide receiver 2 in a game where Amon-Ra St. Brown absolutely went off. So yeah, I'm happy about that one as well. That was a big win. I also learned in week 2 that I cannot multitask and do live shows while I'm updating my rankings for injured players. So do not judge my rankings from last week because I could not move out guys like Keenan Allen and AJ Brown. We're going to figure out a better strategy for that next week. But other than that, everything was fantastic except for tight ends. Tight ends were a hot mess, but we're going to talk about that. Yeah. We're going to talk about it. We have a couple of mailbag questions on that. We're going to have mailbag questions on tight ends every single week, of course, because that is the big drama of this early season. These underperforming tight ends. I feel your pain on that one because I do have some Travis Kelce shares that are not paying off, and it's very frustrating there. So we're going to commiserate together and figure out a solution on how to attack this tight end position. But before we dive into these mailbag questions and before I dive into your live chat questions as well, because I see you guys over dropping the questions, and thank you for the hearts, we're going to talk about a nice little storyline from week 2 here. One of my happy storylines from week 2, the rookie breakouts for Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Nabers after obviously week 1 drama, particularly with Marvin Harrison Jr. Having a complete dud of a game and everybody jumping in and saying like, this is why you don't draft rookies early. And this could be a bust and, renaming him various bust nicknames. Marvin Harrison Jr., our boy, came in and had himself a day. Kyler Murray apparently decided that it is his job. Thank you, Kyler Murray, for deciding that it is, in fact, your job to supply the volume to Marvin Harrison Jr., and it was fantastic in terms of his debut. Fantastic. It was, my God, the first quarter. It's wild that everything happened within the first quarter. 130 yards. 2 touchdowns. I mean, these were and they were back-to-back bombs. It could have been an even bigger game, but quite frankly, the pass game and opportunity kind of suffered, unfortunately, after we had that massive breakout because the Rams kind of laid a massive egg, unfortunately, with all the injuries that they've had across their offensive line and the receiving core. So they just weren't able to keep up. Then the Cardinals were able to rely very aggressively on their ground game, so they didn't have to throw those bombs to our boy Marvin Harrison Jr. So the day could have been even more fantastic for him if the Rams had made this remotely competitive. But just looking at that overall performance immediately after that week 1 panic, the connection between the two looked fantastic. It was good to see that development there. And you realize that sometimes these things do take time. And so there was really no panic there. But I think the big question that we all have here is whether or not this is going to be continued. Was this just one like flash in the pan kind of amazing game from him, or are we going to see this type of wide receiver one production? The wide receiver one we were, very close, damn near drafting him as. Are we going to see that continuation? And I feel fairly confident we're not going to get these massive games from him every single week, but I do feel like, we need to buy into this continued production from him and Kyler Murray as well. It's just confirming exactly what we thought and why we were drafting him so high, why we were in on Kyler Murray for this nice bounce back here as well, as a top 5 potential quarterback here. The opportunity is so high for them. And there's, the offense looked fantastic. It was flowing very well. The ground game is strong. Overall, you just really didn't see any major issues. On top of that, we have, we had Trey McBride turn things around. Well, Trey McBride really wasn't one of those that failed, but his week 1 wasn't where we expected it. But we had Trey McBride having solid contribution. The ground game is obviously fantastic. Michael Wilson stepped up as well. Greg Dortch kind of faded into the background a little, but it's good that they have all of these ancillary players. Overall, the offense is looking fantastic. And so the continuation of Marvin Harrison Jr. having these high upside weeks, it feels a lot more positive. We're feeling confident about it. So we're buying into this breakout performance for him and continuing to see fantastic things for him as the season develops. Now, kind of transitioning over to Malik Nabers, it's a very different situation, right? Obviously, he does not have a Kyler Murray type of quarterback. Daniel Jones, Daniel Jones is Daniel Jones, right? So his, coming into the season where we were drafting Malik Nabers, and why some people, some fantasy managers, some fantasy analysts were a little bit afraid of him and felt like we were, drafting him at his ceiling because of the quarterback situation. Week 1 kind of felt like confirmation bias for people. We had a lot of people jumping in and saying, okay, these kind of 10-ish point fantasy point performances are going to be what we typically see from him. He had 5 receptions for 66 yards. Wan'Dale Robinson was the target leader. And you start to kind of panic around that, because if you look at Daniel Jones and his, past several years, where the targets have tended to flow, he's had struggles kind of consistently going to the outside. Slot has always been where he has kind of had his bread and butter. And you never really knew if it was because that's all he can do is hit the slot, or if it's because the Giants did nothing but sign a ridiculous amount of slot players, right? So which one was it? Was it the chicken or the egg? What was the culprit here? And so in week 1, Malik Nabers not getting the bulk of those targets and it being Wan'Dale Robinson, you start to get a little panicked of Daniel Jones doesn't have the capability to provide the volume needed for Malik Nabers. Week 2, all of that turned around. And he got the high volume there. He had 10 receptions, 18 targets. Where the target share was over 60%. That is insane. His target share was actually higher than his catch rate. That doesn't really happen. That's a wild scenario here, but it's just a reminder that he is the prominent wide receiver in this offense. Now, unlike the Marvin Harrison Jr. situation, you get a little bit concerned that, obviously when Daniel Jones is not in such advantageous matchups, Washington is obviously, it's going to be, and it's going to continue to be a fantastic matchup as we continue throughout the entire season. You get a little bit concerned and say, okay, we see this upside in an excellent matchup, but what happens when you go back to those difficult matchups? What happens when you're playing a Buffalo? What happens when or let's say, we'll stay in division. What happens when you're playing Dallas? What's going to happen there? Are you going to be able to supply that high volume to Malik Nabers? So I feel like his situation is obviously more volatile, and we should kind of not expect this level of production. He was wide receiver 3 and half PPR. That definitely is a ceiling game and something that we're probably not going to hit on a regular basis, but it was fantastic to see that capability does exist for Daniel Jones to be able to supply him with that level of volume. And it's got to be volume, right? Because some of those targets are going to be a little or a lot, potentially a lot off, unfortunately. So the catch rate is not going to be fantastic. Again, we've compared this a lot to the kind of Garrett Wilson situation, which is very true. It's ironic. It's a very, very similar comparison there, because Garrett Wilson's rookie season, his second game, actually had a very similar massive breakout game. So just kind of beware on that one, that we should proceed with caution. Don't all of a sudden think of Malik Nabers as a, top 12 wide receiver on a weekly basis. The reality is that he's not, and it's not his fault. It's literally just Daniel Jones. But seeing this upside here was fantastic. You feel more comfortable about where you drafted him, but we got to keep ourselves just kind of grounded in reality there with him. All right. We've got some other fantastic rookies. Brian Thomas, obviously, the continued consistency that he's seen. Not those big boom games that we've gotten from Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Nabers, but visually, Thomas has looked like the dominant wide receiver in that offense, even if he's not dominating massively in targets. Ironically, I believe it's Gabe Davis who has the highest target share. It's also Gabe Davis who is consistently on the field with the highest snap count. But to get personnel-wise, I guess that's just kind of how their offense flows. But in terms of, visually the production and the upside that Brian Thomas is showing, very promising for him. So I've continued to be higher on him. Not this week, unfortunately, because it's such a tough matchup and we can't really trust Trevor Lawrence to go off in this matchup. So it's going to be another low volume situation. But of all the wide receivers in that Jags offense, and including tight end as well, Brian Thomas is the one that I trust the most. So it's fantastic to see him really asserting himself as the wide receiver 3 in terms of fantasy value this year in this class, right behind Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Nabers. So that covers it for the rookies there. We are going to dive into some questions. Before we dive into some questions, I see you guys in the chat. We're going to hear a quick word from our sponsors over here for you guys listening on YouTube and Twitter and all of that. I will be right back. And a quick word from our sponsors.
Now, I know many of you are looking for a secret weapon for your Dynasty League, and I have it. It's called the Dynasty Dominator app. You go to the App Store, go to Google Play. It's right there. It's $5 to download, and then every year it's $5 to load the next incoming class of rookies. You can add superflex, add tight end premium. It's incredible because it allows you to look up players. It allows you to vote on whether a player is a buy, hold, or sell, and then see the market sentiment on that player. And you can compare their lifetime value rating from PlayerProfiler to their Dynasty ADP at the FFPC, all in the price lookup tool. And beyond that, we have a trade analyzer, so you'll never lose another Dynasty trade again. And in our settings, you can set this is a win now team, this is a rebuilding team, and then we let you compare players. Look at their metrics side by side, prospect metrics, NFL metrics. It's all there. It's $5 in the App Store. There's some add-ons for Superflex and to buy the upcoming rookie class. Every year, you're going to spend $5 on this thing, and it's going to be well worth it.
All right. Welcome back, guys. All right, we're back live on both platforms. I see the questions coming in, and we are going to, that's so funny. I see the comment over there from Heavy. Is Podfather 2x speed, or was that just how he talks? I'm like, yeah, it's not 2x speed. That is how he talks. Yeah. In the videos, at least. In person, a lot more slowed down. But yeah, the man is a machine. Answering questions from you guys. And then we'll dive into some mailbag questions here. From Toucan Sam, will Scary Terry turn around this season? Scary Terry can turn around to what he has always been, unfortunately, which is just barely outside of a consistent wide receiver 2. I feel bad for Terry McLaurin, and I'm not going to lie. This was one where, when it comes to rookies, and I hate, it's funny because we get a lot of early season takes of saying you missed on this or you missed on that. In week 2, can you really say what you hit or miss on? I've thought that Jaden Daniels was going to be a massive upgrade at quarterback for Terry McLaurin, and particularly with the deep ball, be able to finally kind of supply that consistent volume for him. And I don't want to say that that's not going to happen because it's literally week 2. We cannot make that level of judgment. But man, for him, it is a little bit concerning. It is a little bit concerning that I don't know that we're going to see that leap that we were hoping, unfortunately, and it's just going to be kind of the same continuation. And it shouldn't really be shocking because the value that we have in Jaden Daniels has always been in his rushing upside. Obviously, there is development that has to happen from, a passer. Not from him, like obviously passing was not an issue for him in college, but as you transition into the NFL and you're playing, you're a high draft pick, you're playing on these bad teams, Caleb Williams going through the same situation. You're playing on bad teams with suspect, offenses that have to develop over time, maybe even suspect coaching situations. I'm looking at you, Matt Eberflus over there in Chicago. So when we're looking at in Cliff Kingsbury, you're kind of disappointing me in terms of offensive coordinators for Washington early on. But when we're looking at this, these rookie quarterbacks take time to develop. So Terry McLaurin, we're worried in terms of the true ceiling not being reached this year. But at some point, it will get better than what it is right now. So don't massively panic. I mean, we drafted him appropriately for what he's going to be. And unfortunately, it's just not going to be a situation where he has some kind of breakout year. But we're not panicking right here over him. We still got to give Jaden Daniels a chance to develop a little bit more. From Shaka Zulu, 12, Brees and DK, trade question. Brees and DK for CMC and Walker. I'm assuming I prefer the Brees and DK side of that. I don't like the CMC and Walker side. I'm not going to lie here. CMC makes me extremely uncomfortable. I might have talked about it last week on the show. I'm not 100% sure, but CMC makes me uncomfortable for the fact that San Francisco does not have to play him, right? They've got a system where they can plug in Jordan Mason and he can be McCaffrey enough for them to win. Obviously, McCaffrey is a difference maker, but if they feel like they're still on track and on target for a high seed in the playoffs, they're not going to push for CMC to come back. So it's a very real possibility that we won't see him into the latter half of the season. And so trading for CMC, I'm not a fan of it right now, not going to lie. Just because I don't feel like you're going to get the value out of it. And by the time you're able to use him, you might be in a bad situation. And also anyone that is rostering Brees Hall, because I've seen a couple of comments, not here on this live, but a couple of comments across the social media universe. Don't panic. Braylon Allen has looked fantastic, and I am a wee bit surprised that we're seeing that much involvement for him. I loved Braylon Allen as a late round pick because of the upside that he offers from a handcuff perspective. In terms of volume, I thought that the vast bulk of volume was going to be leaning more towards Brees Hall and that we wouldn't see a lot of involvement for Braylon Allen. But I think the increased involvement of Braylon Allen is not an indictment on Brees Hall, more so an indictment on the fact that they don't want to overload Aaron Rodgers. They don't want to have a high pass volume. So if I'm looking at that Jets offense, I'm not worried about Brees Hall at all. I still think that he is a weekly top 5 running back. Don't have any panic around him being crept up on by Braylon Allen. I think they'll continue to be very run heavy. I do worry about Garrett Wilson not having a massive target share in that offense, a massive peppering of targets that we've seen in the past, because this is going to be an offense that doesn't really have to do that. So if I'm worried about anyone, it's Garrett Wilson. Brees Hall is still a top 5 option. So I am not trading away Brees Hall in any scenario, really. Do some other questions here from YB. Should I look to trade Tyreek Hill or keep him? So that's a personal preference right there. I mean, Tyreek Hill, we've seen in the past without Tua, he's not going to have that overall wide receiver 1 upside, but he'll still be Tyreek Hill and he'll still be the more consistent option in that offense. Jalen Waddle is the one that we'll worry about a little bit here. it's tough because we don't have any kind of timeline in terms of, we know we're going to have at least 4 games without Tua, but we really don't know anything beyond that. So if you want to trade Tyreek Hill, I'm perfectly okay with that, because Tyreek Hill is still a guy that you can get value out of. But I don't think he's a must trade right now. I don't think you have to pivot away from him, because he can still be that borderline wide receiver 1. Not what we were truly hoping he would be with Tua Tagovailoa, but the volume is still going to be there on a consistent basis. So we're not panicking too much over there. From Bronson Hio, trade Mahomes, Debo, and Jacobs for JJ. Wow, that's a lot. And or Mahomes, Jacobs, Kelsey, Waddle for JJ. That's a lot. And it's a 2 QB league, and your other quarterbacks are Carr, Geno, and Tua. Well, Tua, unfortunately, you got to move out of the mix there, because there's a very real possibility that we wouldn't see him for the remainder of the season. So relying on Tua, not knowing when he's going to come back, you got to look at it and say your quarterbacks right now would be Derek Carr and Geno Smith. And is that what you want to rely on for the entire season? Yeah, you really wouldn't. So I do like the Mahomes, Debo, and I would say Jacobs side of that would be my preference. But I don't mind the Mahomes, Jacob, Kelsey, Waddle side. If you're getting all of that for Justin Jefferson, that's a massive, massive upgrade. Yeah, that's very, very lopsided right there. From Uncle Ted, over 200 yards this week against the Panthers. Zeus is due. You know what's so funny about that? And I should have, I have wanted to write about this in one of my articles this week. And I think I eliminated it. I was wanting to write about Zamir White and a potential breakout game for him in this excellent matchup against the Panthers, because you're 100% right. Somebody for Vegas is going off. It's a matter of who it's going to be. It was weird to see Vegas kind of do that flip. So in week 1, we expected Zamir White to come out and have this massive performance. And they teetered the volume aggressively not aggressively, but aggressive-ish towards Alexander Madison. And then in week 2, just reversed all of that. And it's weird that happened. And we don't really have any kind of clue as to what they're doing over there. They're talking about going with the hot hand, and there's really no gauge in terms of what qualifies as the hot hand. It was good to see him reassert himself. And I do think if he gets the bulk of the carries, we're going to see a nice breakout game for him. It's just a matter of whether or not he's going to get the bulk of the carries. That's the only thing that held me back from putting my stamp of approval on him in this matchup. I wanted to do it every single week. I do a conviction pick for Yahoo, and I wanted to include him in my conviction videos this week, but I couldn't quite do it. Just because of the possibility of him not getting the bulk of the carries. But if he does, I in fantasy football, if you can not have to risk it, yeah. But in DFS, that's something that I could be looking at for sure. To give you a little edge there, because not a lot of people are going to be looking towards Zamir White. From Zaddy B, thoughts on Pollard this week and rest of season. I love Pollard this week. This is one of my ones that I'm kind of leaning into aggressively this week, just because we look at that matchup. I think we're going to see the Titans want to heavily rely on the ground game and not force Will Levis to attack this secondary, which could factually eat him alive. So Pollard really asserting himself early on as the RB1 in this offense. Now, we did get the Titans coach come out and say that they want to kind of even out the carries a little bit. And I don't think that we should interpret that as them wanting to take volume away from Tony Pollard. I think we should interpret that as them wanting to get more volume for Tajay Spears so that they can increase their reliance on the ground game. So I don't think that volume is going to suffer for Tony Pollard anytime in the near future. He's looked fantastic. I feel super confident about him in this matchup. And we do have Tajay Spears that's been dealing with the ankle injury. He said, I think it's ankle injury, but he said that he's feeling like he's fine. He's going to play, and that's good. But we know that sometimes players say that, and that doesn't always turn out to be the case. So just keep your eye on that regardless. Maybe he's limited, but regardless, I'm very much so in on Tony Pollard this week. Love him as a start. Absolutely rolling him out for sure. Let's get some more questions in here from JTube. I'm scrolling up because let me scroll up all the way to the top here for people that are still tuning in on YouTube, because there was a lot of questions that were in there that I missed when I was doing my little opening monologue there. I like this one from Yakmeister305. With all the Ja'Marr Chase drama and recent struggles, would you try to trade him? Not this week, next week. If you want to do it next week, you could. This week right here I'm calling for a big Ja'Marr Chase breakout game here. I love the matchup. I love the progression that we saw in Joe Burrow last week, much improved. Unfortunately, none of that improvement was saw by Ja'Marr Chase. It was good, but hey, it was good to see Andre Yoshevich step up. I wish that he had stepped up in week 1 from a DFS perspective, but that's another story. But it was good to see that contribution there. We had Jermaine Burton get the big, first catch of his career in a regular season. So things are looking up for that offense. And despite, the additional contributions there, this is a nice breakout kind of get right game for Ja'Marr Chase this season. So I'm expecting good things for him. I would not trade him prior to this week's game. Anticipate a boom game here. And if you want to trade him, you can do it after. But I don't feel like you have to. Cincinnati, we've seen for some reason, they just, and I can say why I think the some reason is, but early season, they have just really struggled to gel. And in my opinion, a big part of that, and it's interesting, I have a question over here from Stanley as well. Have Joe Burrow as QB1, really need him and Chase to get in rhythm? Yeah, and I think it's going to happen this week. I feel like what we've seen from Cincinnati this year and then this past year is really an indictment on preseason and offseason lack of cohesion. They have consistently this season and last season dealt with the combination of contract issues and injury issues. And the problem with that is that the issues that brings is that they don't ever have consistency and development as a team, as a first team offense with Joe Burrow and all the wide receivers at any point throughout the offseason or preseason. And when that happens, it's going to take you some time to get back into your rhythm. So I feel like that's what we're seeing here. They're going to be fine. They started last season to kind of gel and push, and Joe Burrow, and they all had that nice little breakout kind of maybe like 3-4 games in after he was dealing with that calf injury. And then he got injured again. So he didn't see the true realization of it. So if he stays healthy, cross our fingers, he's consistently one of those players that deals with injuries. I think we're going to see the development and the connection form back again. So I like this for a nice breakout game for them. And honestly, that kind of brings me over to a mailbag question here. So I'm going to kind of flip us to a mailbag question because this is very pertinent to the topic that we're talking about here. And it was from Iron Condor on Twitter. Does reducing passing touchdown/performance thus far in 2024 represent a strategic shift by teams, better defense, or the new preseason rust? Let me take a nice sip of water. I lied. This is sweet tea. I've got water on the other side. Before we dive into this question here, I 100%. Now, granted, defenses as a whole do seem to be improving. We've got just kind of like off the top of our heads, obviously we have the improvement from the Houston defense. Chicago's defense is pulling through. Detroit's defense looks like a menace with Aiden Hutchinson out there. Vegas, Max Crosby is always a menace, but he was particularly just, good Lord, a menace last week as well. So yeah, it's a big part of this might be the defense is stepping up, but I really am, and I hate to be like a stickler, I really truly think that the preseason approach is a major problem. I just don't see how you can develop any level of chemistry with these players in your offense as a whole when you just don't have any cohesion in the offseason and preseason. As a Packers fan, one of the things that always used to drive me crazy towards the end of Aaron Rodgers' tenure is that we would have these new young receivers coming in, and you're out there in the darkness and whatnot. I'm sorry, I don't mean to but you're out there doing your thing and you're like, I'm not coming in. I'm a veteran. I don't have to do all of this. And you're having zero bonding experience with your new players. What do you think is going to happen? You're not going to be able to gel with players when you finally do step into the regular season. I don't get it conceptually. I understand that they don't want to risk injury, right? But there's truly a lack of cohesion that is going on with these teams. And we saw a big shift last week, but even then, they still need to step up and continue to push forward. So I think that's the big problem right there. Obviously, there are changes in offense. We talked about the defense, but really these teams just lack early cohesion because they're not getting any time together. You look at a team like Atlanta, Kirk Cousins barely played, and I get it, obviously coming off of that injury, they're being cautious and whatnot. But you got a guy coming off of an Achilles injury, and then you throw him out there in week 1 with very little live game experience. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of development that has to happen for him. And you've got no cohesion with your teammates. You don't have rhythm with them. So I think across the board, especially because we have so many quarterbacks coming off of injuries, that's the major problem here. There's just the preseason lack of cohesion between these teams, and offseason contract drama and whatnot is really just kind of decimated. So it's going to pick up. It's going to pick up at some point, but just very frustrating from a fantasy perspective. Even then, it's just strange decisions as a whole. Like on the topic of Atlanta, even Michael Penix didn't get barely any preseason. They gave him one tiny portion of one game, and they were like, okay, that's good. We've seen enough. You can't do that. I feel like, I'm sorry, I'm rifting here for a second complaining, but I don't understand how you can approach it that way. But then on the opposite side, look at Pittsburgh and how obviously Russell Wilson was dealing with that injury. So preseason was just a whole bunch of Justin Fields, right? Now we get Justin Fields getting the start. Justin Fields looks competent. Gee, do you think that maybe it was that he got a ridiculous amount of preseason reps, got to bond with his teammates, got to really insert himself into this new offensive system, get everything kind of settled in there with Arthur Smith for him to learn the tendencies and for Arthur Smith to be able to utilize him correctly? He looks like a different player. And you kind of wonder, this man played the vast majority of preseason. Was that a big portion of why he looks so much more comfortable early in the season? Yeah, strong possibility there. So yeah, sorry about that. Long soliloquy rant there, but I thought that was such a good mailbag question. Because it's more kind of like a philosophical thing of why this early offense from these teams has just been so dreadful. So very intriguing. Let's get back to some questions here. From Jeff Sherwood, Marvin Harrison Jr., Rashee Rice, Devonta Smith, pick 2. Oh my God, how do I pick 2 between those guys? Genuinely, how do I pick 2 between those guys? Let me go to my rankings. Jesus Christ. Because the one that I have ranked highest is Rashee Rice, honestly, this week. The level of consistency he has provided. And then I have Marvin Harrison Jr. ranked, and then I have Devonta Smith. But again, Devonta Smith could move up a little bit depending on what happens there with AJ Brown. Is trending to him not really being able to play. So I kind of lean towards you figuring out how to get both of them in there and fading someone else. I wonder who your other, if those are your 2 wide receivers and put one in flex, who else would you be sitting? Because all 3 of them are top 12 options this week. So I really can't say. I mean, it has to be theoretically Devonta Smith, or it's just tough there. And if AJ Brown sits, then you would have to move him up, and it would be Marvin Harrison. So yeah. You also have Lamb. Yeah. Then if it's Lamb, Rashee for the consistency, And then if AJ Brown is out, Devonta Smith, and you would have to sit Marvin Harrison Jr. Oh, that's so sad. But yeah, it would have to be him if AJ Brown is out. From Donovan, Mike Evans, or Jameson Williams. Your other laptop. Go get your iPad, buddy. Sitting in the hallway. No, I just play the other laptop is downstairs. That's a side note from football. If you guys kind of just heard my son come in asking where my other laptop is so he can play on the laptop. He's 4 years old. And he can work it. Like, he can turn it on. He could put the password in for my laptop and then put on some games. I don't understand how children have this level of technology, technology. I can barely work my StreamYard over here. Crazy. Is CD going to play? Yeah, he's dealing with an injury. We don't know for sure the level of severity. So we have to wait. Wednesday practice reports, I never kind of buy into them. You kind of take it into more consideration if he's out on Thursday and then obviously out on Friday. That's a big deal. So you do have to kind of pay attention to that one. Let's do some more questions over here. Sorry, it's so hard for me to... Oh, this is a good one. Okay, from Eternal, because you guys are also talking to each other in the chat. So sometimes I'm trying to figure out which ones are questions and which ones are you guys just chatting, which is wonderful. You guys can chat away. I love that. Keep the chat active. From Eternal 305, thoughts on picking up Ricky Pearsall on waivers now? Yeah, and if you have the room for it, 100%. If you have IR spots, I would have already done that. But yeah, if you've got the room to hold on to Ricky Pearsall, I would do that. Problem obviously being that by the time he's eligible, maybe Debo is back, but it's worth it if you have the bench space. We don't know how long we don't know how long Debo will be out. Again, that's another one where we kind of have to take into account that the 49ers can win and have plenty of weapons and can afford to fully rest people. So just kind of keep that in mind. From Damian Hall, 807. Who are you picking in the Chiefs backfield? Carson Steele for me is the one that I am. I know Kareem Hunt obviously has the... Oh, sorry about that. Got a phone call. I know Kareem Hunt obviously has the upside there in terms of the name brand, right? But from a actual usability perspective, just kind of look back to him in Cleveland of last year. Obviously, him and Jerome Ford kind of played like a back and forth there. So kind of looking at that situation, you kind of do have to wonder, even if Kareem Hunt gets a role within that offense, how easily will he be outperformed by a younger running back there? So I lean towards Carson Steele is the one that I prefer. I know a lot of people like the potential upside in terms of PPR of Samaje Perine. Just bear in mind that Samaje Perine couldn't beat out Javonte Williams and Jaleel McLaughlin, and that backfield looks horrible on another level. So again, leaning into the older backs now, I just prefer to go with the young guy. Steele looked solid in preseason, so Carson Steele is the one that I prefer. From Brazzy, Caleb Williams or Deshaun Watson this season. So rest of season question. Quite frankly, I would rather risk it with Caleb Williams rest of season. Chicago's offense is a major problem, and really, I truly think that Matt Eberflus is the problem, and I'm ready to see heads roll. So it won't hurt my feelings at all. And I'm a Packers fan, so there's no bias in this. I don't know. I guess I kind of I'm a big college football fan, and obviously, wrong finger. When you guys are looking over there, you see my Clemson stuff. I cheer for my fellow ACC guys, and NFL is different. But when I look at, our division rivals, I do want them to be competitive. I would rather the division be competitive and see Detroit and Minnesota and Chicago succeed. So I want Chicago to kind of turn things around and get competitive. I like the direction that defense has held there. But when we're looking at that offense, I still think that coaching is a massive issue there. Concerned that the offensive coordinator situation wasn't the hire that people thought it was, especially since we see Geno Smith over there in Seattle thriving without Shane Waldron. So really, what was Shane? Were you the issue there, and are you the issue now? So yeah, I still think I lean towards the talent of Caleb Williams. You get worried about Deshaun Watson at some point. Chicago will stay grounded and surround Caleb Williams and uplift him. You get worried if team morale around Deshaun Watson is going to wane over time. And if he just continues to fail, at what point do they say, we gotta seriously rethink things? Now, granted, contract is an issue, but at some point it's a sunk cost if your team is not going in the direction you need to. So in terms of volatility, I feel like Deshaun Watson is the more volatile between him and Caleb Williams. So I would go with Caleb Williams rest of season comparatively. Good question from Millie Mills. Do we get a Tank Dell sighting this week? We kind of got one last week, a little bit. Unfortunately, he appears to be the clear wide receiver 3 in that offense. And Nico is just so dominant. Now, it was good to see that Stephon Diggs kind of took a little bit more of a backseat, and so we could maybe see some variance between him and Tank Dell. But Tank Dell, just the reliability is not there. We're crossing our fingers that we're seeing the sighting this week. But again, it's a risky flex play. I am having to flex him this week in a Dynasty League where I have no Deebo Samuel, and it's a sad situation, but we're going. And thank you for the comment, John Carlos. I appreciate it. I genuinely hope that I am helping you guys. Question from Brandon Wynn. How do you feel about trading McBride for Laporta and Reed? I don't mind that. Yeah. Yeah, and you're given the slow start in McBride's target share. Now, I'm not concerned about Trey McBride in terms of the target share. It's not. I mean, we had to know, and this is why he was my clear was tight end 4. Yeah, he was my tight end 4 because again, he was going to go second in terms of target share to Marvin Harrison. But I feel still pretty encouraged that McBride is going to be one of the more consistent tight ends throughout this entire season. So I'm not worried about McBride when I compare him to the entire tight end landscape. I think he's probably a little bit more reliable comparatively to Laporta, ironically, just because we have this surge of Jameson Williams. Yay, Jameson Williams. We have the surge of Jameson Williams coming through. But Jaden Reed, getting Jaden Reed in addition to Sam Laporta on that trade, that makes me lean towards that Laporta and Reed side. That Laporta and Reed side is my preference there. I'm going to jump over and take some questions over here from TikTok from Ben Wilson. JMO or Monty at flex? This is Jameson for me. David Montgomery is obviously very, very stable option for sure. He's not gonna blink you. But I liked what I saw out of Jameson Williams. I talked about it earlier at the top of the show. With Jameson Williams, I saw exactly what we needed to see last week from him. Again, the big positive there is that we had Amon-Ra St. Brown have a massive 19 target game. And despite those aggressive pushes towards targets, we still saw Jameson very much so involved in the offense. So that was fantastic. I feel like Jameson is a weekly flex option for sure, a weekly low end wide receiver 2. I feel very comfortable with him. It was good to see that level of involvement with Amon-Ra St. Brown still asserting himself as the wide receiver 1 there. So I love what I'm seeing out of that offense in that wide receiver core. That's exactly what I wanted to see. I wanted to see target dominance from Amon-Ra St. Brown, and I wanted Jameson Williams to clean everything up. So it is shaping out perfectly. Chef's kiss. That is exactly what I want to see. Let's do some more questions over here. Rashid Shaheed or Drake London? Drake London, I lean towards Drake London. Again, now we have to be cautious with the level of trust that we put into Drake London, because he did come off of obviously having that resurgence there. That was fantastic. But at the same time, we still need to see a little bit more from Kirk Cousins. Obviously, the performance ended up pulling through, but it could have easily gone another direction, right? So we need to be cautious with that. But I still lean towards Drake London. But if you can find a way to get Rashid Shaheed in there, I would, just because it's an excellent matchup. It is an excellent matchup. Brazzi, should I drop Sutton? No, we'll hold on to Sutton there. He's still the wide receiver 1 of that offense, although weird things are happening in terms of targets in that offense. Just because obviously Bo Nix can't get the ball past like right in front of him, unfortunately. So that is a wee bit of an issue. Oh, thank you for the gift, Brazzi. Really appreciate it. But yeah, we're still holding on to Courtland Sutton based off talent and the fact that he is the wide receiver 1, and hoping that we'll see some additional development over there from Bo Nix. But we're being very cautious about it, obviously. I'm going to do a couple more mailbag questions here, kind of on the tight end train here, because we've had a couple of tight end questions. We had one from Kenji O on Twitter. I still say Twitter. I refuse to say X. I'm going to be in old ornery person and say I'm not transitioning. Sorry. What's with most of the top tight ends having subpar starts to the season? Kelsey, Laporta, Andrews, Kincaid. I think the problem is that we underestimated with all, and I think Andrews is the only exception here, really. But we underestimated, particularly with Kelsey and Laporta, just how much the upgrade of the right, and I say upgrade of the wide receiver rooms, and they're kind of upgraded in 2 different ways. Obviously, the Kansas City upgrade is the addition of Xavier Worthy. The Laporta, the wide receiver room for Detroit upgrade is the fact that they finally let Jamison Williams step into that wide receiver 2 role and are giving him that volume. So the problem is that we assume these guys were going to maintain the level of looks that they were typically having in their offense, and we overestimated that. We underestimated the value of the wide receivers, the lower wide receivers in the receiving groups asserting themselves. And unfortunately, it's just messing with their target share. So again, I know a lot of people kind of worry that maybe Kelsey is teetering towards, over the hill, and age is a major issue. But problem is that I don't know if that's the major issue. It's just more so the receivers. We saw the level of dominance that Rashee Rice was. Like, Rashee Rice was the target leader last year in terms of how he eventually developed as the season went on. It was very clear that Rashee Rice was going to be that number 1 guy. And the only question was, again, in the offseason, dealing with the suspension possibility and the addition of Xavier Worthy and wondering how much that was going to cut in. I think that kind of made us overlook the fact that Kelsey was going to kind of slide back. And I'm guilty of it. I'm not going to lie. I'm guilty of probably overranking him and Laporta and Andrews as well. The only person that I would say I didn't overrank there was Kincaid, and that is because the volume in that offense was always going to be rather flat. It's just tough to have him get an aggressive level of volume when Buffalo is leaning on the ground game, not pushing high volume through the air, and they want a very even target distribution, because that is what kind of happened at the end of last season, why Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis both saw dramatic dips in targets. It wasn't because they fell off because of talent or getting old, as some people were thinking that Stephon Diggs was getting washed. It was that they changed the way their offense functioned, and the target share just kind of flattened out, unfortunately, and nobody really stood out. I kind of see that as the continuation this year. Maybe they make some adjustments if it isn't clicking, but Kincaid, I don't think we're going to see that top 5 upside that we were kind of looking at. So I don't think the tight ends are underperforming because of any kind of talent issues. It's just that the offenses are being approached in vastly different ways in terms of how the receivers are being used and how target share is kind of working itself out. And that kind of leads us into another mailbag question from Adam at Dark Empire 2014 on Twitter. Need some tight end recommendations in this vast wasteland of trash. It's time in this vast wasteland of trash at tight end that we lean into the typical trash tight ends. And I hate to call them that, but it's time we lean into the Hunter Henrys. It's time we lean into the Mike Gesicki's. It feels weird, right? But yeah, we kind of got to go towards the ones that have shown that positive progression of target share. That's why I've moved Brock Bowers all the way up to my tight end 2 on the week, because his target share has been so consistent, so reliable. He's had 17 targets over the first 2 games. We want to lean into these guys who have volume. We don't want the volatility of guys that are only getting 4 or 5 targets. We want the upside there. So when you look at a guy like Hunter Henry in that Patriots offense, where the receiving core is just, it's flopping, unfortunately, and they're pushing volume towards Henry. Obviously, he's been volatile in the past, but I kind of feel like we're going to see a continued usage of Hunter Henry in this offense. It's flowing well from them. It's working. I don't see why they would change it. So if you want to grab Hunter Henry, lean into him, you can do that. Mike Gesicki is the other one who is might be readily available on your waivers. Gesicki's week 1 would have looked a lot better. He had that touchdown that he dropped. He did the gritty still, but he had that touchdown that he dropped. And his fantasy production in week 1 would have been a little bit higher if he had actually held on to that ball. But the involvement that he's had in that offense, yeah, we got to lean into it. It's been a while. It's been a long time since we've seen a tight end pop in Cincinnati. And Gesicki does fit well with Joe Burrow. He fits into what they want to do. We've been hoping and looking for these tight ends to kind of step up in Cincinnati's system, and it's never happened. And finally, it looks like Gesicki is that guy that's going to make it work. And I'm leaning into it. So if you want to pick up him, stream Mike Gesicki. Volume has been decent enough. I don't feel like we're going to see T. Higgins this week. And even then, so I don't know how much I trust T. Higgins when he gets back. I know we've had a couple of trade questions regarding T. Higgins. I would not trade for T. Higgins. We actually have a mailbag question from Sebastian Payon as well for rest of season, T. Higgins or JSN. It's an easy JSN for me. And it feels weird because obviously T. Higgins has been that guy that we've pumped up as a wide receiver 2 with wide receiver 1 upside, but he's just not reliable in terms of his availability. And it makes me, I've always felt, especially this past year, I have no shares of T. Higgins, not even on dynasty teams. I've just got none because I'm not dealing with it. The level of inconsistency and unreliability. And I hate to say that about my Clemson boy, but it just hasn't been there from him. And so rest of season, I would prefer to have JSN over T. Higgins. Obviously, if any little kind of injury thing pops up for him, he's rightfully so. Rightfully so. This is not criticism of him. He is rightfully so going to think about himself. He needs to get a contract. He doesn't need to get out there and injure himself, push himself. He's better off playing. He doesn't need to prove anything. We obviously saw that with Calvin Ridley. You don't have to prove it. These teams have seen your talent before. If you're the top receiver on the market, they're going to pay you as such. Ridley got his payday coming off of what we thought was, a subpar-ish season. T. Higgins could be in the exact same position next year. He doesn't need to push high level of production. And so for that reason, we need to be a little bit careful about him because rightfully so, he's going to protect himself because he needs to get his contract. So, and I completely understand that. Let's do a few more questions before we wrap up here. Read some comments too from you guys too, from Millie Mills, Mondre to the moon. Yes, love Ramondre Stevenson. He is one of my conviction picks this week. I've got a video on Yahoo talking about Ramondre Stevenson, leaning into him this week, like the matchup for him, the expectation of good volume for him. Love him this week and love him continued rest of season as well. So happy for Ramondre getting that contract in the offseason. Question from Buckets. Need your help. I'm 0-2. Trade Ladd and Moss for DJ Moore. Also, what should I try and get for Sam Laporta? His value is kind of low. That's good. Yeah. So you're wanting to trade away Ladd and Moss for DJ Moore. I think that's a perfectly acceptable trade. 100%. I would do that. When it comes to Sam Laporta, I'm confused. Are you trying to acquire him or are you trying to sell him and get something out of him? While I'm waiting for that one, from Yak Meister 305, can you see Rico Dowdle taking over this backfield? Obviously not a bell cow, but maybe a 60-40 split in his favor moving forward. No, kind of not, unfortunately. And the reason why is that Zeke, if nothing, has just been an Iron Man throughout his career. He's doing decent enough to where I don't think that we have to kind of worry about him fading out in terms of his usage. Do I think that Rico will flip it? I don't think so. At best, we're probably looking at an evenly split backfield, but honestly, I still think that they lean towards favoring Ezekiel Elliott just because he is the more well-rounded player as a whole in terms of his abilities. So I like Rico, but I don't think that he is going to be able to overtake him. You're looking to trade Laporta. If you were, you can shop him around. Honestly, shop him around for if you're struggling at running back. I think you can shop him around for one of these guys, like we just talked about, a Ramondre Stevenson. Someone might be willing to give up Ramondre Stevenson if that was their RB2 or RB3. Maybe they went RB heavy. And Laporta still holds value just based off his upside from last year. So I still think that you don't have to sell Laporta low right here. I think you can get good value out of him. I'm comfortable with trading Laporta right now. From Raven Edits, trade Richardson. Not after this game. I actually just did a video on I think it's on my I reposted. If you're on my TikTok, it's in my reposted videos on Anthony Richardson. He's volatile. He's going to be volatile. His game is basically pure volatility because, again, he is a how do I say this? A deep ball passer. Sorry, I got a phone call. I think I got to go and get this in a second. But he is a heavy deep ball passer, right? And that's going to naturally come with a lot of volatility for him, unfortunately. So when we're looking at him, don't panic over what we saw last week. Just kind of keep that in check. It's going to be sometimes, up and down for him, but I don't think you need to trade him away unless you have something very solid at quarterback. The upside is still there. He looked fantastic in week 1. Just kind of accept that this was just a rocky week for him, and we still have that upside with him. All right, guys, I gotta close out the show here. I gotta wrap things up, but I know there are tons of questions, so please drop the questions. If you're on YouTube, drop the questions in the comments, and I will go back and get them there. Or you can tag me on Twitter or drop them in my TikTok videos, wherever you are. At It's Tera Time, ITSTERATIME, and I will get back to you. But that wraps things up. As always, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and to my platform or social media platforms across the board. Again, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, pretty much everywhere. Outside of that, I appreciate you all tuning in. Good luck with your lineups last week or this week. And again, drop those questions if I missed any of them because we had a lot. Appreciate you all joining in. I will see you again next week. Thank you. Good night.